He gave us originally the lead for our speaker tonight, John Pierce. And what Ron told me was that he was representing some of the January 6th defendants and had represented Kyle Rittenhouse. He's the young man in Wisconsin who's being prosecuted for murder, even though the video shows clearly that he acted in self-defense. So that sounds very interesting. And in getting to know John more, he does a lot of really other interesting cases, including representing Carter Page in his FISO case. So he's done a lot of very interesting work. He's formed an organization called the National Constitutional Law Union to try to do what the ACLU says it does, and perhaps at some time in the past did do, and that's uphold our rights and freedoms and Constitution. So there's his organization, and you can find more about the cases they're handling. Stand Up to Tyranny, Create a More Perfect Union, and our liberties are certainly at stake. And we need attorneys like John Pierce to step up and defend those liberties. With that, and he is one of the leading attorneys in the country, we're pleased to have him with us tonight. And with no further ado, I do notice here, you may notice here, he has very expensive shoes that John is wearing tonight. And when I first started practicing law way back in 1984, you know, every court appearance, you couldn't be on telephone or video. You had to show up in person. We all wore suits. We wore suits to the office with leather dress shoes all the time. Wore a tie in the office all the time. You go to a deposition, you wear your suit to the deposition. And now you got sandals and jeans and an open shirt. And that is how all of us practice law today, except maybe when you show up in court. And with that, John Pierce.
Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This is a lot different than talking to a jury, I can tell already. And by the way, that picture actually is real. It's about 40 or 45 pounds ago, but I will get back to that point. I promise. Absolutely. And thank you very much for the kind words. I happen to think I am one of the top trial lawyers in the country, but I can just see the Twitter sphere exploding tomorrow with John Pierce's self-serving introduction as being one of the top trial lawyers in America. But no, thank you very much. And by the way, just to be clear, the flip-flops are not meant as any offense to anyone here. I've just had such an incredibly busy, well, several years, but busy day. I had like 3 hearings on the January 6 cases and did a podcast with Greg and had about 15 clients with different crises, and so I just didn't have time to get organized enough to put proper footwear on. So thank you for allowing me to do that. But it is, wow, it's really nice to be in front of a friendly audience. I will tell you. First of all, it's amazing to be in front of the Tea Party. I mean, if I would have known I was speaking as sort of a keynote speaker replacing Larry Elder at a Tea Party event. Somebody who told me that 5 years ago, I would think I was moving up in the world, which I guess I am. So no, it really means a lot to be in front of a friendly audience. As I'll go into in some detail here in a bit, I represent. I mean, I'm losing count now, to be honest with you, but I represent, I believe, about 20 of the January 6 defendants. All of whom, thank you very much. All of whom, as I'm sure you know from following this, are in desperate need of help from people like me, and there are not enough folks like me to go around actually to represent them. And you know, I'm going to have some limitations on what I can say about the January 6 cases because I'm a lawyer in those cases, and I will get into it a little bit here soon. But you know, a lot of these guys are locked up in virtually solitary confinement, presumed innocent for months on end in extremely unpleasant conditions, in which there are some real Eighth Amendment issues at stake. And that's just one symbol of you know, where we're at as a country right now. But also, first of all, let me say, please feel free. I know we have sort of a question and answer situation going on. Please feel free as I'm talking to fire away. I kind of like the interactive back and forth. But we'll get into it and then we'll go from there. First of all, just let me say, as somebody who loves the country and loves the Constitution and understands it at least marginally well, there is bad news and then there's really, really good news. The bad news, and I think you all know this, but the bad news is that our Constitution, which is the finest document ever to government in history, is under full-scale assault by the radical left. Non-stop. The good news is that God is on our side, we are Americans, and we will win because we are going to fight, and we're going to fight, and we're going to fight no matter how long it takes to take our country back. And just because, believe it or not, I'm often followed around by some of these three-letter agencies, let me be clear, I was being metaphorical when I said fight just now, just to be clear. And I'm actually not joking. It's great fun. So first, let me just tell you a little bit about myself and how I kind of stumbled into this situation of being in the middle of all these cases, and talk about a few of the cases that I've handled over the last several years, which has really been right at the center of all these things going on. Then I'll talk about January 6 cases a little bit, and then I'll tell you about this new organization that I started that I desperately need everyone's help on. So, very briefly, I'm just a kid from Western Pennsylvania. I'm from Mill Creek, Pennsylvania by Lake Erie. I went to Notre Dame on an Army ROTC scholarship. I served in the 1st Cavalry Division as a M1A1 tank platoon leader in the mid-90s. Thank you. I must say, unlike this gentleman over here, I just shot at plywood targets, so don't get too excited. But I was airborne. I did have a Ranger School slot, and one of the things that keeps me up at night is that my platoon needed me to go to gunnery in the National Training Center before I could go to Ranger School, and I never had time to go back. So that's one thing that keeps me up at night, that I didn't get that Ranger tab. But regardless, served a few years in the Army at Fort Hood, and did airborne school at Fort Benning. But then somebody in Cambridge, Massachusetts at Harvard Law School made a mistake in the admissions office and let me in there. So graduated from that lovely institution in 2000. And by the way, just as an aside, for those of you who are not aware, this poisonous, toxic philosophy and theory that we hear about, this critical race theory nonsense, which is just going to tear the country apart if it's not dealt with very rapidly. I mean, that has its roots actually in what's called critical legal theory, which is something that came to fore really at Harvard Law School primarily a few decades ago. And really, it's all complete, nonsense. I mean, it's all about power, and it's all about simply convincing people that the so-called powers that be at any given time are evil and bad and have to be ripped down, and something has to be put in its place. And of course, it's always the communists and the Marxists who are tearing it down who want to be put in its place. So I have mixed feelings about Harvard Law School, as you can imagine. Then started off life in Pittsburgh, met my ex-wife at Harvard Law School, who's a Stanford soccer star. After a couple kids in the cold weather, she wanted to get back to be with her family, so we moved back in LA in 2006. I started off being a partner at the big elite global firms like Quinn Emanuel and Latham & Watkins, doing work for Samsung versus Apple and the multi-billion gazillion dollar litigations that you may have heard about, and if you haven't, don't worry, it's not that interesting. Even though both parties spent probably $500 million on legal fees to argue about the curve on the edge of the iPhone, who had the right to that, which is really quite something. But then, really kind of overdosed on the big law firm world, and just kind of working for those kind of entities, and started my own firm several years ago. And really started to grow it very quickly. And really, the way, and by the way, I am a hardcore America First, Donald Trump, Republican, conservative populist all the way. But I I did not, start my firm with the specific intent to get involved in all of these things, and especially not to, have the FBI following me around, looking at every word I say. But really, what happened was, I started my firm essentially at the same time as not this last election, but the election in 2016, and a lot of things, as we now know, were happening behind the scenes, kind of before and after that election, and ever since. And one of the good things, by the way, one of the great things about Donald Trump winning, among all the other great things he did, was that in the course of all the attacks against him and all the litigation that's occurred over the past several years that I was in the middle of a lot of, the one silver lining is that it was really exposed the extent to which the radical left would go to destroy this country. And I think that if Donald Trump had not won, if Hillary Clinton had won that election, and he probably won just because they got the algorithms wrong in 2016 and they fixed them in 2020. But one of the silver linings is that now it's really been exposed the extent to which the radical left will go to destroy this country. And I don't think that would have occurred if Hillary Clinton would have won and we would just continued into this managed decline, giving the world over to the New World Order and the Chinese Communist Party. But in any event, so I start my firm and, we grow and we're doing all this kind of good stuff. And then all of a sudden, the situation started to percolate that really arose from the Russia hoax. In which, our lovely law enforcement agencies and our intelligence apparatus attempted to prevent Donald Trump from winning in the first place, and then attempted to sort of subvert his presidency viciously for the course of the next following years. And so really, the first thing that happened was when George Papadopoulos was about to be sentenced, he was not very happy with his current lawyers. He saw one of my partners on Fox News talking about his case. He reached out to us. So we started representing George Papadopoulos. We got him dismissed from the DNC RICO case, in which they were trying to launch RICO claims against the president and, a bunch of Russians and George, and, to say it was a big conspiracy to steal the election. We got him dismissed from that. And then ultimately, we were successful in getting George pardoned by President Trump, which I think was a very important thing. Thank you. No, that was a really important thing. And now still, I represent somebody who's close to me as a brother, who's a great American and who was more viciously attacked by his own government than anyone I can think of, aside from perhaps some of what we have going on now that I can't talk about too much. But I represent Carter Page and all the FISA abuse litigation that stemmed from the Russia hoax situation. And thank you. And I'm not sure. This is a very, very well-educated room with respect to this stuff. So I'm sure a lot of you realize what was going on there, but. Essentially what happened was, and Carter, by the way, is an Annapolis graduate. He's got like 5 degrees. He's one of the most lovely people you could ever know, extremely patriotic. And as a footnote, let me say, the worst thing that James Comey and the FBI ever did was to pick George Papadopoulos and Carter Page as the 2 people who allegedly were running around like Jason Bourne trying to steal the election with Russia. It's really quite something that they chose those 2. George I love to death, but he's a kid from suburban Chicago. Carter, bless his soul, is not somebody you ever want to mess with. And whenever the FBI approached him and wanted to go sit down and talk to him, Carter is the one that brought the laptop with the PowerPoint presentations, and it's the FBI who was desperate to leave after about 3 hours while he was taking him through everything that actually happened. So that's I always enjoy that vignette. But basically what happened, in a nutshell, so much happened. But as you probably know, what happened was the DNC and Hillary Clinton bought and paid for the Steele dossier using the law firm Perkins Coie as a go-between in order to pay Fusion GPS to get this bullshit Steele dossier that they were going to try to use to bring down President Trump. The person who worked for Fusion GPS who transmitted the Steele dossier to the FBI, as you may know, happened to be named Nellie Orr. Nellie Orr gave it to someone at the FBI who happened to be named Bruce Orr. And Bruce Orr, Nellie's husband, of course, got it in the hands ultimately of people like James Comey and Andrew McCabe and these lovely individuals who were at the top of the FBI. What they then did, and this is really, I mean, you almost have to give them credit for how brazen this was. What they then did is they leaked the Steele dossier to Michael Isikoff at Yahoo News. Yahoo News then published an article accusing Carter Page of being a big Russian spy, and therefore the Trump campaign's infiltrated with Russians, and it's Russia, 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 Russia. Then the FBI dropped a footnote in the FISA application citing the Michael Isikoff Yahoo article that they had planted in the first place in order to get a fake FISA warrant and several against Carter Page. So you can see it's this sort of, circular bootstrapping thing, and you have to be so impressed with our law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies to even think of such a thing. So those litigations are still going on, hot and heavy. There are several of them. The main one is we have sued the FBI, the Department of Justice, James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and the whole crew in federal court in Washington, D.C. We got to get justice for Carter Page. I mean, that is so important. It's unbelievable. Partly because, as you also may know, do you know how many people have been held accountable in any way, shape, and form for what happened to Carter Page? Zero is really close, but it's essentially one. It is one to this point. And let me just briefly mention what it is because it's all public. And it's almost hard to believe that this happened. And it's almost hard to believe the degree to which this individual was not really held accountable. So in the FISA process, whenever the FBI goes to get a FISA warrant, a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant against someone, and by the way, as you probably know, the FISA Act, the FISA apparatus is meant to protect us against foreign terrorists, right? And this was kind of the first instance of what we see now, which is unfortunately the exquisitely fine-tuned and effective sort of anti-terrorist, aspects of our federal government are, make no mistake about it, they are being turned against us right now, and they are being used to hunt down people like me and people like you and people like a lot of my clients in the January 6th cases. Just as a quick aside, a few of my clients. One of them is a Vietnam veteran who has a Purple Heart, who's a pastor, and his son and their friend. He volunteered for Vietnam, no criminal records for any of these people. And, just when you thought it was slowing down, that the FBI was doing their flashbang 5:30 in the morning routine, Roger Stone routines, a few weeks ago they showed up at the house of these folks in Florida at 5:30 a.m., dragged them out, complete with AR-15s being pointed at the 3-year-old and 1-year-old grandchildren, right? Now that's on tape. That's public. I don't even think they're ashamed of it at this point, which is very disappointing. But that's what's happening. And one of the things, and I guess I'll go on tangent after tangent here, but one of the things that I'm kind of surprised about, to be honest with you, is that you haven't seen mass resignations from inside some of these federal agencies, inside the FBI, the CIA, or the NSA, because of some of this conduct. But you don't see it. I mean, I'd like to think that most of the issues are at the top of the food chain. I'm becoming a little bit more concerned as we see more and more of these raids, and as we see a lack of line agents kind of standing up and saying no more. But it is what it is. Back to the Carter Page situation. So there's been one person held accountable from all of this, and keep in mind how, and this goes to the quote about equal justice of law. Keep in mind how bright the distinction here is. So in the Carter Page situation, essentially the entire law enforcement and intelligence apparatus of the United States of America was turned against one human being in an attempt to change or alter a presidential election, using tools that are designed for foreign terrorists to spy on an American who's the most patriotic American you could ever think of for, over a year. And in that process, the FBI has to go to other intelligence, other law enforcement or intelligence agencies, and ask them if they know anything about the proposed target. And keep in mind, this FISA application, the FISA court, is a super secret court, which is an ex parte proceeding, where the potential subject of the FISA warrant gets no legal representation whatsoever. So this is supposed to be this is supposed to be the environment. I mean, lawyers always have a duty, at least in theory, to be candid to the court and to be seeking, the truth and be telling the truth. This takes it to a whole new level. When this is an ex parte proceeding, getting a warrant to spy on an American citizen, it takes it to a whole new level. So one of the things that they have to do is ask other intelligence agencies, law enforcement agencies, if they know anything about these people. And so they, one of the things they do is they ask the CIA, hey, do you know anything about this guy? Right, this Carter Page guy, do you know anything about him? And so the CIA responded back in an email, and this is public information now. Yes, he is a source for us. Because in Carter's, consistent with his patriotic life, after he was done serving in the military, he was doing business dealings overseas, primarily in Eastern Europe, and when he came back, he would report anything that he thought was relevant, to our intelligence agencies. That email saying that he was a source for the CIA came back to the FBI, and then a lawyer for the FBI went into the native version of the email and inserted the word "not," so that the upshot of the statement was 180 degrees opposite of what it was meant to be. Wow. So it said Carter Page is not a source for the CIA. They then used that and cited that in their FISA applications in order to get these fraudulent FISA warrants against Carter Page. Wow. Now that individual who forged a CIA document to spy on a patriotic American citizen for over a year, ultimately leading to no criminal charges, by the way, he ended up pleading guilty, and guess what he got as punishment? He got probation. He got probation. So that is the only individual to date, and I don't know if anybody here holds out hope for John Durham. I mean, let's hope that something happens on that front. But that is the only individual to date who has been held criminally or civilly responsible for that entire situation in which they destroyed life after life after life after life for pure political power in order to bring down President Trump. In contrast, and this is where the equal justice of laws type things come in addition to something like the Carter Page situation or the George Papadopoulos situation, last summer we all saw pretty much, every or most cities in the country attempt to be burned to the ground by Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Including places like Kenosha, where I camped out for about 5 or 6 months, which I can talk about in a little bit, Minneapolis, Portland, Seattle, Los Angeles. They held a federal courthouse siege for over 100 days and tried to burn people alive inside. Those folks, the Antifa folks, the Black Lives Matter folks, who are responsible for billions of dollars of damage and the loss of hundreds of lives and incalculable injuries, they essentially have a catch and release plan that was largely funded by our Vice President, Kamala Harris, in her efforts to raise bail money. And most of those charges have been dropped. In contrast, we now have over 550 American patriots who, and again, I have to be careful talking about these specific cases, but who showed up on January 6th at the Capitol grounds You saw some of the things that happened or didn't happen. I won't pass judgment on what you saw. But they have the full force of the Department of Justice and the FBI coming down on them, scorched earth, really, and they'll admit this. Their chief prosecutor called it shock and awe in 60 Minutes. And they are facing a raft of charges that could land them in jail for decades and decades and decades. That is bullshit. And the distinction between things like what happened with this person who forged the FBI document, for Carter Page, and what happened with the Antifa, riot people, compared to what is happening to these American patriots, what that does is that shatters the faith that Americans have that there is an equal system of justice under the law in this country. And when that, and this is very intuitive and it's pretty obvious, but when that is essentially the fundamental American idea. Is equality under the law and under God, because we're all individuals that are made in the image of God. That's the fundamental American precept, really. And whenever that concept, that precept, is shattered in connection with the faith that we perhaps used to have in our election system, when that is shattered at the same time, that is not a good recipe for a free society or a constitutional republic. So those are the types of things that we have got to fight back against, every day in the trenches, on every front. Let me tell you about a few more cases that I'm dealing with, and let me tell you about the organization I started, and then be thrilled to take any questions that anyone has. So represent Carter Page and all that. Also represented America's mayor, Rudy Giuliani, who I love. Great guy. A fun guy. He gets excited on TV sometimes, but he's a great guy. He's an American patriot. He had his residence, of course, stormed at 5:30 in the morning by the FBI to take all his electronic devices, as the former personal president to the lawyer, which is quite something. But represented him for 6 months or a year and some of the stuff that he was dealing with, just to prove that the law and lawyers help everybody. I also actually represented Tulsi Gabbard in her presidential campaign against Hillary Clinton for the Russian asset comment that you may recall that Hillary made during that campaign. Also then Halo jumped in to represent Kyle Rittenhouse in the Kenosha shooting case. Represented him for about 5 or 6 months, helped raise the money to set him free, set up his criminal defense team. No longer represent him, but to be absolutely clear, that is 100% self-defense. That kid needs to be acquitted. If that doesn't happen, then we have mob justice in this country. And then after that, kind of moved on to the January 6 cases, kind of one after another. So let me talk just briefly about those, and I need to be, again, a little bit careful about that, but then happy to, and then let me tell you about my organization real quick. So while juries and judges will decide the fate of the individuals who have been charged, who showed up at the Capitol, and that's what I really need to be, careful about, and I have to let that process play out. What I will say is that, by and large, the people who came to Washington, D.C. that day, not necessarily, talking about my clients or defendants in the Capitol, Hill Capitol building cases, but the people who came to Washington, D.C. that day, they came to Washington, D.C. because they felt that the election was stolen from them. And they came to D.C. to petition their government for redress of grievances under the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with what they did. And so, so in light of all these things, I've kind of found myself, and by the way, one of the reasons I said it's so nice to be in front of a friendly crowd is that representing 20 of these folks, you can imagine I'm not very popular with about 50% of the nation's population. And so if you Google me, you'll see all kinds of fun stuff. Only believe the fun stuff, not the nefarious stuff. But let's just say I don't get a lot of positive energy from a lot of directions because of that. So it's very nice to be in front of a friendly crowd. But that's the way you gotta think, and that's what I try to do every day. So seeing all of this and really seeing how desperate our situation has become. And when I say desperate, let me just say. I'm a big fan of Steve Bannon's podcast, War Room Pandemic, and he talks about this a lot, which is that we are in a true crisis in this country. We're in what some people would describe as a fourth turning, in which, just kind of human nature and generational societies kind of lead to these situations where every 70 or 80 years or so, there's an existential crisis in which things could go either way. And so, I really believe that the time that we're in right now, and it's different because we're in a different time. So it's a multifaceted war that we're in. And again, for the three-letter agencies, I don't mean like we're going to fight an actual war right now. But I think this is akin to the American Revolution, the Civil War, or World War II, in the sense of we're going to win, but we're going to come out of the next several years. It's going to take several years. It's going to take 4, 5, 6 years, like any other major conflict would take, and we're in a full spectrum conflict with evil, and so we're going to come out on the other side one of two things. We're going to come out either restored to what our founders believed that we should be and set our country up as, which is a federal constitutional republic in which individual liberty reigns and in which the federal government has nothing to do except what is specifically enumerated in the Constitution, with everything else reserved to the states under the 10th Amendment. And make no mistake about it, and if anybody thinks the Chinese Communist Party hasn't been in the middle of everything that we're talking about right now, then, I think it's obvious. Or we're going to be part of a new world order that is essentially run by the Chinese Communist Party, the globalists like George Soros, the crowd in Davos, Switzerland, and their business model of driving labor to the lowest possible wages, including slave labor, and in which the whole world is divided by this critical race theory nonsense. And make no mistake, right now they have 40 or 50 guys that are in a gulag in Washington, D.C. It's not going to stop there. So if we don't stand up now, history tells us what's coming. So we're going to come out on the other side, one of those two things. So seeing all that, and obviously seeing that the ACLU is simply a complete tool for the radical left at this point, I won't even go into that because it's such a joke and it's so preposterous. So I founded the NCLU, the National Constitutional Law Union, about 2 months ago, and what it's designed to do is to basically be what the ACLU is purported to be, which is an organization that is designed to help protect everyone's constitutional rights. It's not, even though I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, I'm sure most people in here are, the way that we protect our Constitution and our individual liberty over time is that we fight for everyone's constitutional rights, even those that we don't like, whenever they start to be infringed, because the power politics of the world will swing like a pendulum. That will happen over and over and over again. And the way that we avoid the vicious cycle that took out the Roman Republic, where there was just a constant, cycle of retribution when each side got in power, is that we have a killer app, which is the United States Constitution. And as long as we stick to those words, as long as we stick to the text of that Constitution, and we fight for it on a daily basis in the trenches when people's rights are being violated, then we're going to win. But that's the key. That's the Constitution is the key to all of this. It's not about. I mean, look, we're going to have to fight on social media. We're going to have to fight in the courtrooms, and there's going to be hopefully there's not too much kinetic fighting in the world. But this is a multi-spectrum fight. But the United States has a killer app, and it is the Constitution. But as our founders said repeatedly, even if you have the best written Constitution in the history of the world, which we do, it will not survive long if you don't have a virtuous citizenry to kind of undergird it. And so in my humble opinion, I think, the two things that have to happen in this country going forward as we retake, branches of government here, I think we will very quickly in these next couple election cycles, are this country has to, and believe me, those who would hear me say this would laugh with irony and many other things, because I am far, far, far from perfect. But I've come to realize this country has got to return to God. We absolutely need, and we are due for, and I'm telling you, I think I can sense it starting to happen. The only path forward to victory is a spiritual reawakening of a traditionally moral American people. And then we need to rein in the federal government. Every problem that we're having right now, every single problem that we're having right now in this country, in my view, we're 99.9% of them, stems from one thing. It is that the federal government has become a monstrosity in which it reaches its dirty tentacles and its fingers into every aspect of your lives. And once it gets that kind of power, it is very, very, very difficult to tear it away. And so whoever, once we retake the House and the Senate, and once we retake the White House, which I have faith that we're going to do all these things, and whether it's Donald Trump or it's Ronald DeSantis or it's somebody else, we there we go. I'm a huge Larry Elder fan. I had to follow Larry Elder, so I'm a huge Larry Elder fan. I really am, and obviously we got to retake California. But whoever gets in those positions of power again, okay, we cannot fix this thing around the edges. Okay, there is no reforming the FBI. There is no reforming the CIA. There's no reforming the NSA. They have to be, again, metaphorically and peacefully and lawfully, ripped out root and branch. Okay, and at least three quarters of the federal government has got to be eliminated to never be seen again. So I'm sure that's enough to get me in plenty of trouble in the next few days. So I kind of stop there. But let me just say finally, and then happy to take any questions or move on to whatever's next. And by the way, I'd love to talk to, I'll hang out, love to talk to anybody who wants to chat afterward. We need your help very, very, very badly. And let me put this into some context, because I know that everybody's always needs donations, and everybody always needs financial resources, and it's true in many instances that so many groups do. But please understand this. In these January 6th cases, for example, which the NCLU is helping to fund, we are up against an entity, the federal government, who, I'm not kidding, has unlimited resources because they have your money. They can and will spend hundreds of millions, hundreds of millions and probably several $billion when you wrap it all together in their efforts, from the investigative efforts to the cyber efforts to the logistical stuff to all the lawyers in the DOJ to everything, to bring down and destroy these 550 American citizens. Right now, and not to over-dramatize it, but I'm a trial lawyer, so I like analogies. I do kind of feel like Gerard Butler in the Thermopylae 300 movie, kind of standing in the breach, holding back the million-man Persian army. But the bottom line is that we really, really, really need your help for that battle and all these battles, because there's a tsunami of these cases coming. So we've had a really, really good response in the first couple months, honestly, without doing anything like this yet. We've raised, I think we have over 1,000 individual donors, an average of, $57 each or something, but it's a really great start for the first couple months. But we need financial resources. So please, please, please do everything that you can to help us. It's nclu.com. whether it's $50 or it's $50,000 or whatever it might be. And please help spread the word to everyone. If anyone's interested in becoming like a serious fundraiser for us, we need bodies to help actually fundraise. But please check out the website, and love to hear your feedback. And you can reach me on the email that's on there. And that's all I really have myself. But I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has, or just jump off the stage if
we might have a few questions. There's some people lining up here. Here's one more donor. And the Redlands Tea Party Patriots.
Thank you so much.
And the Redlands Tea Party Patriots will add another 150 on top of that. And if anyone else can help out with the, January 6th defendants and political prisoners can have a adequate representation, please do so. You don't have to agree on the radio. You didn't agree with me, but I'll just say it. The January 6th was a Democrat Party, FBI, but then I repeat myself, Reichstag operation. There are FBI agents and informants in the crowd. There are Antifas in the crowd. The police will open the door. Now, who ordered the police to open the doors of the Capitol and let them in? This was a Reichstag operation to achieve the effect it did. It changed the subject from the election fraud to the insurrection.
Let me add something to that real quick. That's a very good point. And one of the things I'm sure everybody knows and appreciates in here is that the left is very, very good and better than us historically at using language and semantics and rhetoric to kind of shape the battlefield, right? Everybody in Kenosha was a peaceful protester. Everybody at January 6th was an insurrectionist. Let me be very clear about this. Everybody here, I'm sure, knows that insurrection is an actual crime, right? Okay? Do you know how many charges there are for insurrection against 550 defendants? Zero. So let's just say there's a bunch of defamation claims that are coming after we clear everybody, which will be fun. So.
If you have a question, you can line up here, and I have some in written form here. Can any of the bills and budget reconciliations, i.e. H.R. 1, if passed by Congress, be reversed in the next Congress and make it impossible for such a Marxist takeover of our republic? With H.R. 1, if you're not familiar with it, it would be to mandate vote fraud-friendly laws over the entire country, and so they could steal elections everywhere, every time.
Yeah, so that's obviously their goal, right? I mean, and this is the left, this is classic, leftist sort of tactics. Once they get the advantage, they want to press and go for the jugular and have permanent political power for the rest of their lives, right? That's obviously their agenda, and that's obviously, this HR 1 nonsense is obviously kind of a piece of that agenda. So a couple things. So number one, that law, if passed, and I have to confess, I've been so busy with some of these cases that I haven't, followed the back and forth in Congress. I mean, my understanding as of now is that hopefully it's not going to pass because of Manchin or Sinema or something like that, and that they can't pass it under the Reconciliation, Act, although they might try. But the bottom line is that it's fundamentally and blatantly like unconstitutional, like from the get-go, right? I mean, under the Constitution, and I'm going to forget which exact article it is, but under the Constitution, the state legislatures have absolute, total control over the way that certainly their presidential elections are run, and I'm sure over the way that their local elections are run, because the Constitution doesn't say otherwise, that the federal government has that right. So it is certainly blatantly unconstitutional. Let's hope that Trump made at least a couple good decisions with respect to his Supreme Court nominees. I have been disappointed in some of them, to be sure. I just don't get sometimes how when our side gets these picks, they end up being folks that 10 years down the road we're like, what the hell were they thinking? Whereas, the other side seems to get their picks and they just vote, the way that they're supposed to vote. But the answer is it's unconstitutional. It should be struck down by the Supreme Court immediately if it is passed. Even if it's not, the state governors, like people like Ron DeSantis or Greg Abbott or whoever you folks think have some actual cojones, they simply should not enforce it. And that's one thing that we have to get back to, is these state governors have a massive amount of power. We're not a nation state. United States is not a nation state. It's a federal constitutional republic. These states are the actual sovereign states. That's reality. That's the way our system works. And so these governors, and I got to tell you, there's some, and I really hate to say bad things about people because people do it to me all the time. But some, like, I've been very disappointed in some of the things I've seen from Kristi Noem in South Dakota. There's some that are good, there's some that are not so good. From what I see, I like Ron DeSantis, I like Greg Abbott, I'm gonna love Larry Elder, but these governors have got to stand up. For example, take the Arizona election audit. What right does Merrick Garland have to threaten Arizonans and Arizonan legislatures when it comes to auditing their own election, that they have an absolute textual constitutional right to run however they damn choose? Okay, he doesn't have that power. Okay, and so he can write letters all day long, but I'm gonna tell you something. I'm gonna be careful because I'm gonna get myself in so much trouble. But these states, these governors, have the power to control what happens in their states with respect to the things that they are legitimately entitled to control in their states. And another quick example is the southern border. Okay? What is it? I don't even want to. Obviously, the federal government is doing nothing to control the federal border. Every single border state governor, including our soon-to-be governor Larry Elder, should immediately seal that border with whatever state assets it requires, and ensure that we're not getting MS-13 members and COVID super spreaders and coyotes and whatever else coming across the border. It's unfortunately looks like it's getting too late, but it's got to stop, and the state governors have a responsibility to stop it. Final point on that is, if by chance HR 1 does pass, if by chance the Supreme Court upholds it, and if by chance the states don't do anything about it, yes, once we retake both houses of Congress and the White House, we can reverse it. But again, it might be too late at that point. So let's stop it right now.
How do we deal with the kind of catch-22 that they cheat and the elections are not honest? We have to win the elections in order to pass voter integrity laws and make the elections honest.
Yeah, it's kind of a circular catch-22 issue, isn't it? So I think there is. So let me, the eternal optimist that I am. Let me say this. The left has been planning this for decades. Okay, the right, we tend to be productive people. We just want to live our lives. We want to, used to want to watch sports, although we probably don't want to watch sports anymore because they're all woke. But we just want to live. The left has been planning this kind of stuff for decades, and planning this kind of takeover. And part of that is they had you folks know what the phrase lawfare means. It's basically using the legal system as a weapon rather than using it to actually redress actual grievances, right? And the left did a very good job of conditioning the battlefield before that last election with 200 lawsuits to condition the battlefield. And then afterwards they were ready to go with lawfare and a legal army to fight that. Unfortunately, the Trump campaign was not. It just was not. And I think that, again, one of the silver linings of that 2020 election, and I'm from Western Pennsylvania, and let me tell you, when 55,000 people in Western Pennsylvania show up in Butler County for Donald Trump, okay, that tells you something. And when in Pennsylvania, Donald Trump is up by 15 points at 11:30 at night. Okay, there's just a smell test. You don't need to get into the Dominion systems and this and that. There's a certain smell test. So the point being is that I have to believe that for 2024, whoever runs, it is going to be front and center to be prepared for that lawfare fight, which is going to occur again. But look, the bottom line is we have to win. Trump or DeSantis or whoever has to win by so much that it's not even possible for them to try this nonsense again. And a final point, and let me say this. there's one of the groups that really fell down here in the 2020 election in terms of not living up to their responsibility. And this is very serious. And I was saying this on Twitter at the time. Is that the Constitution has a mechanism to deal with this kind of situation. Okay, it's called the 12th Amendment. And it's been used before. I think it was with Andrew Jackson in 1824, one of these, it's been used a couple times before. But the bottom line is, the state legislatures control the manner of selecting electors for the Electoral College. If they believe that there had been, fraud or any kind of questionableness about the election process, their remedy was extremely simple. They didn't have to hold big hearings. They didn't have to wait till January 6th. In December, when they had to certify the electoral votes for their states, all they had to do was say, no, we're not doing it. And a lot of those were Republican-controlled legislatures. And if the Republican-controlled legislatures in the swing states we're talking about had said, it's too messy, we're not doing it. We're not sending electors. We're not sending Trump electors. We're not sending Biden electors. No candidate would have gotten 270 electoral votes, which is what's required. And then it immediately goes to the House of Representatives under the 12th Amendment, in which each state's delegation gets one vote, and that's how you select the president, and Trump would have won, by the way. They were too cowardly to do that. They didn't do it. But I'll tell you what, this next time around, if there are any kind of shenanigans that are anywhere near what we saw this last time, that absolutely has to happen, because that's the constitutional way to make sure there's some legitimacy. We do not want to see this slide into anything worse. But the Constitution has, our founders were geniuses. They had a mechanism for this. The Republican legislature just simply didn't exercise it.
Is there any way forward? Arizona's done an audit, and let's say Arizona comes out, there was more than enough fraudulent votes to change that result. Georgia does the same, Wisconsin does the same. Is there any way at this point to redress the wrong of the stolen election, or is that just something we just have to wait until 2024?
Yeah. So the short answer is I don't think there is. I know there are some folks that are out there that are on my side of things, on our side of things, who are optimistic that there is, and who are saying that there is. Just the way that I view and read the Constitution, there are simply certain fail-safe dates and things that are in the Constitution. Once the states send their electors, and once that certification happens, and once that inauguration happens, at least in the way I view the Constitution, and there could be folks that differ with me on this, but at least in the way I view the Constitution, our redress is to figure out what exactly happened wrong and to punish them politically the next time. I just don't see the mechanism there to make it happen.
When will you make it into the real big time and be on the War Room with Steve Bannon?
I'm ready. Every time I talk, I mention the War Room and Steve Bannon, so maybe he hears me and he gets me on there sometime. I was on the Tim Pool podcast, which is a really, really great podcast if you get a chance to watch that. And his new chief editor is Cassandra Fairbanks, who writes for the Gateway Pundit, and she's pretty close with Raheem Kassam, so I'm hoping that I can get on there soon, but we'll see.
Are you on Gab?
What's that?
Are you on Gab? Alternative
I am. So unfortunately, I'm on the worst, most toxic, most terrible social media platform, Twitter, just because I haven't had time. I just have not had time to get organized enough to get on all the ones that I should. But I'm gonna before all these big January 6th trials start, which will be not for a while. I'm gonna try to get organized on that front. But just for the record, on Twitter, I'm Cali Kid JMP, because I feel like I'm a little bit young, so I call myself a kid, and I like the JMP because it's like JFK or something. But Cali Kid JMP.
Yeah. What was that for? I didn't get that.
Oh, it's kind of like the JFK, like acronym. I feel like kind of like that.
I didn't get the first part.
Oh, I just feel like I'm youthful at heart, even though I'm 49. Mm-hmm. So I call myself Cali Kid JMP. Yes.
County Kid.
Cali Kid JMP.
JMP. Okay.
Yes.
Someone here said, talk about Article 4, Section 4. Now, offhand, I don't know what that says. I'm not sure if you know what that says offhand.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a gotcha question for somebody who's up here talking about, being the biggest constitutional lawyer in the country, not knowing what that is. But if somebody can yell it out, I can talk about it. But it's a long document, so I don't have every. There we go. Okay.
Article 4, Section 4.
Article 4.
We are educational here.
Okay, so now I'm under pressure. Article 4, Section 4. Yes. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion in an application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature cannot be convened against domestic violence. This is a great one to quote. And I'm sure there are multiple reasons why the person referencing it was quoting it, but here's what jumps to mind for me, which is in addition to the fact that our First Amendment's being attacked on every front, the Second Amendment at every level of government's being attacked, the Fourth Amendment with search and seizure, the Eighth Amendment, what has also been attacked is the guarantee of a Republican form of government with a little r. Every state has that guarantee from the federal government, okay? And let's just say that when the mayor of Seattle allows warlords to set up chop and chaz zones in their cities that is not governed by any law or order, that is a blatant violation of that provision, and it happened a lot last summer. I will also say this, not to put myself in a position of being in the Oval Office quite yet, but if I were, and I love Trump, but if I were Trump, you want to talk about insurrection? That stuff was insurrection. If I were President Trump, if I were in the Oval Office, I would have invoked the Insurrection Act so goddamn fast on those people, it would have made everybody's head spin. Okay, you really have no choice. I mean, these people in an American state, an American city, just had their government give over blocks of terrain and give up police stations so that these idiots could, sit there and not shower and just do whatever they do for weeks on end. That was an insurrection. Attacking the Portland courthouse for over 100 days, that was an insurrection. And there is an Insurrection Act. And by the way, my understanding is that Trump was this close to invoking it in Seattle. I love Trump. My personal opinion is it should have been done right away. And I honestly, I think the fact that it wasn't done right away and that there wasn't a bigger issue made out of the unrest in American cities, I think may have cost him a little bit in November. But yeah, no, that's a constitutional provision that has been steamrolled in the past few years. Yeah.
You think your clients can get a fair trial in Washington, D.C., or is that overwhelmingly Democrat jury pool going to say, "Oh, Trump supporter, guilty"? So, let me ask a leading question in a safe way. Who thinks the January 6th defendant can get a fair trial in the District of Columbia? So we filed motions to transfer venue in each of our cases. Again, I have to respect these judges as an officer of the court, and I have to let them make their decisions, without trying to unduly influence anyone. But it's the District of Columbia, and if you were accused of the things that they're accused of, I suspect you'd rather be, tried in Amarillo, Texas, or something, and not the District of Columbia. So, it's a tough motion to win. We're trying with respect to each of our clients. I do think that potentially it sets up, appellate issues, if not granted. The thing that's sad to see right now about and thank you for all the amazing questions, by the way, but the thing that's sad to see about our justice system right now, in addition to the two-tiered nonsense that we're seeing, is, and this is very scary, it's a very slippery slope. I'm sure a lot of you watched that Derek Chauvin trial about the George Floyd situation in Minneapolis, right? And there can be lots, there can be lots of different views on that case. Honestly, the merits of that case, certainly,
and I'm not going to get into my opinion on the legal merits of the charges, but as a trial lawyer, I will say, that video, that 9-minute video that you could play over and over and over and over and over again, that was something that was really tough to overcome. However, what kind of justice do we have in this country if Maxine Waters shows up like right before jury deliberations screaming that we need to burn everything down if it's not the right verdict, and that if the President of the United States gets out in the East Room or wherever he was and says we really want the right verdict and justifies it because he says the jury had been sequestered already, so it's just fine. I mean, they're not going to hear what he has to say, right? That's a really, really, really bad thing for the justice system. And candidly, I mean, it's concerning for cases, like Kyle's case. Like, Kyle is 1,000% innocent. Perfect self-defense, not even close. Okay? But we need to have fair jury trials in this country, and the Chauvin one was not a fair jury trial. And I'm very concerned about the question that was raised. We've got to let the judges decide, and do our best, and then go from there.
We are just coming up to 9 o'clock here, and we try to get people out of here. If you have any final remarks or comments, I'm happy to hear them. Otherwise, we will thank you very much for your coming over.
NCLU.com, donate, recurring contribution. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's such a pleasure to be here. You guys are amazing.
Thank you, John.